All right, welcome back to our video lecture series. We are still with chapters 2 through 6, looking at the early civilizations, part 1C. This time around, we're going to be looking at the Indus River Valley, which is one of the four river valley civilizations. Now, the Indus River Valley civilization oftentimes is called the Harappan civilization because of one of two major cities is known as Harappa. The other one is called Mohenjo-Daro. Now, this civilization arose about 500 years after the Egyptian and the Mesopotamians, and they arose along the Indus River Valley, which is in modern-day Pakistan and India. Now, the people that lived there, they're known as the Dravidians, and they cultivated wheat and barley, just like they did, which are the same crops that were cultivated in Egypt and in Mesopotamia. Now, what makes the Harappan civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, stand out is their cities, particularly, of course, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. And what makes them stand out is how well planned their city was. So they had a very sophisticated level of city planning, which was much more sophisticated than what we saw with the Egyptians or the Mesopotamians. Now, for example, one of the things that they did was they had well-planned streets. So the streets, for example, they would be wide enough so that you can have sufficient space to accommodate all the traffic, including like horse-drawn chariots and horse-drawn wagons and stuff like that. On top of that, underneath the streets themselves, they would dig out these tunnels that you see here that were kind of used as sewers. And each house had its own connection, its own line to the sewer system. So essentially, they had a very primitive, very early system of sewers, allowing you to flush human waste out of the house and not dump it out into the middle of the street where other people can get infected by it. And it will simply, exit the city through these tunnel systems that they built, and which means that this was a very hygienic society compared to the others. Another unique thing that we know about them is that they built granaries, which basically are just storage granaries that would store grains, excess grains. So, for example, the government will collect extra food surplus every year and store them. So, in case that there's a drought or a flood, then the people who are in need have that supply available. They also had something known as the Great Bath, which was in Mohenjo-Daro. Essentially, this would be filled with water, and people would come in and do their daily ritual bathing. And again, we see a high level of hygienic cleanliness that we wouldn't see elsewhere. The public well would be essentially where everyone will have water supply, and this would not be contaminated by human waste, so everyone could have free access or easy access to the water supply. Here you see the public well down there. And you see some of the granaries would be these kind of tower-looking buildings, and here we see other structures of the ruins in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. Now, compared to the Mesopotamians and compared to the Egyptians, we know very little in comparison about the Indus Valley. We do know that their cities were abandoned at one point, and then the people just left, and the cities turned into ruins, and that's what we have nowadays in Pakistan and in India. Part of the reasons we know so little about them is that even though they've created a form of writing, just like the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians did, no historians has quite figured out what they mean. And they wrote in the language or in the style called pictographs, which is the same as the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, right, where each little picture symbolizes a word or an idea or a thing. And no one, like I said, no one has figured out what they meant, what it means. We do know they had a lot of jewelry. We do know they did statues of themselves and, pretty advanced pottery as well. We do know that, that based on the housing, that there's, big houses and small houses. So that's evidence of social stratification, right? Upper class, lower class. We know that they had irrigation projects like the, digging of the sewer systems and the well. So we know that they were advanced, they were civilized, they had the similar characteristics as other civilizations, as the River Valley ones, but we just don't know much more than that. And there's different theories that historians have come up with. And the main theory is that they collapsed because of environmental factors. So some people believe that a massive earthquake changed the flow of the river, the Indus Valley River, and that might have made the cities inhospitable because they didn't have easy access to water anymore. Others believe that they caused deforestation. They would cut down all the trees and basically the to make room for crops. But the problem is that the soil will lose its nutrients over time, and therefore it'll become barren, and you can't grow any more crops. And so we know that chances are some environmental issue might have caused this problem, right? So could have been also a massive flood, right? So here we see remains of humans, right, who were buried in their homes. So we think that maybe it was a massive flood that caused this destruction. Others think that they just moved out because other people were moving in, and that's how we look at the Aryan migrations. Now, the Aryans were people from Central Asia. They were known as Indo-Europeans. And there's actually similarities within the languages that the Aryans speak here in India compared to the languages of the Greek and the Romans, which is Latin. Right? There's actually similarities in those languages, and those are all known as the Indo-European people. They speak a very similar language. Um, or that had some similarities within their language. So these individuals from up north, they migrated into India over a long period of time, about 500 years, and slowly and surely they started mixing and blending in with the local population, with the Dravidian people. So some people believe that the Indus Valley civilization changed with the arrival of the Aryans. Now, the Aryans were actually pastoralists, right? They're nomadic people. And the Indo-Europeans are given credit of being the first people to domesticate the horse. So wherever it is that they traveled to, whether it was to Greece or to Europe or to, in this case, India, they brought horse domestication with them. And one of the things that probably aided in their migration and allowed them to come in and take over is the fact that they would fight on horseback, right, using these chariots that you see here, and that gave them a very big advantage. But eventually, Aryans would settle down, they'll stop being pastoralists, and they will start setting up new societies across northern India. Now, the Aryan society was divided into clans, and each clan had their own chief, and each clan claimed their own territory. So there wasn't like one, it wasn't like an empire ruled by one individual central authority figure, like an emperor or a king. So each little tribal area would eventually become its own independent, separate king. So we can see how these small kingdoms start popping up all across India. So we see, they still have the horse. They're still pastoralists. They or that someone practice pastoralism. They use barter, right, which is to trade for one good for another, which is common during this time frame. And eventually they'll start using coins as well. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Aryan language, which is part of the Indo-European group of languages, is known as Sanskrit. So basically, they would, for a long time, their stories and their myths, their legends, will be passed on orally from generation to generation. But eventually, they started writing stuff down, right? Because they learned how to write in Sanskrit, or they developed the written language of Sanskrit. And Sanskrit shares similarities with other languages, like I mentioned, like the Greeks, the Persians, Latin, English, right? These languages are also known as Indo-European languages, and they have some similarities with Sanskrit. So you have languages from Europe all the way to India, and they kind of come from the same origin, right? That Indo-European language. And what we start seeing in India is a slow cultural kind of division between the northern part of India and the southern part of India. And we see this even to this day in modern times with language. And what I mean by this is that in the northern part of India, they speak Hindi, right? And that is a language that came from the Aryan language, from Sanskrit. And in southern India, right, where we think those Indus people migrated to move as the Aryans came in, they speak Tamil, which is a Dravidian language. We also see the ethnic difference, right? The Aryan people tend to be lighter skinned, while the Dravidian people tend to be darker skinned. All right, so that is it for section C on the Indus River Valley. See you next time.